The distant gunshots echoed across the plains as Florence Wilson clutched her swollen belly, her white wedding dress stained with the dust of the harsh Montana territory. It was 1875, and what should have been the happiest day of her life had transformed into a nightmare that left her standing alone at the crossroads of desperation. Florence had grown up in the small mining town of Copper Creek, the daughter of a preacher who had passed away last winter, leaving her to fend for herself. She'd been betrothed to Joseph Miller, the son of the local banker, a match that promised security for her future and that of her unborn child. But on the morning of their wedding, everything had changed. "You belong to me now," Silas Blackburn had said, waving the debt papers in her face as Joseph's father nodded solemnly beside him. "Your father borrowed money from me before he died, and now payment's due." "My father owed no one," Florence had protested, her voice trembling with fear and rage. "He was an honest man." But her protests had fallen on deaf ears. Silas Blackburn, the most feared man in 3 counties, had claimed she'd been sold to him to settle a debt that she was certain didn't exist. Joseph, the coward, had stepped aside, unwilling to challenge the powerful rancher who controlled most of the water rights in the territory. Now Florence found herself being escorted to Blackburn's ranch, miles from town, with only the clothes on her back and the child growing inside her. The marriage ceremony had been interrupted, her future snatched away in an instant, and Florence fought back tears as the wagon bounced over the rutted trail. "Don't worry, Mrs. Blackburn," Silas's foreman sneered from the driver's seat. "The boss likes them with spirit. Might even let you keep that bastard you're carrying if you behave." Florence's hands clenched into fists. "I'll never be Mrs. Blackburn," she whispered, too quiet for the foreman to hear. "And my child is no bastard." As the wagon crested a hill, Florence saw a lone rider approaching from the opposite direction. The silhouette was unmistakable against the setting sun, a broad-shouldered man with a cowboy hat pulled low over his eyes. The foreman noticed too and reached for his sidearm. "Keep driving," he ordered the driver. "Don't stop for nobody." But the approaching rider had other ideas. He spurred his horse, cutting across the open prairie to intercept the wagon before it could reach the next bend in the road. The foreman stood up, gun drawn, but before he could take aim, the stranger had already closed the distance. "Evening, gentlemen," the cowboy said, his voice deep and measured. "Seems like the lady might not be enjoying your company." "This ain't your business, stranger," the foreman growled. "This woman belongs to Mr. Blackburn now. She's payment for a debt." The cowboy's eyes shifted to Florence, taking in her wedding dress and the fear in her eyes. "Is that so, madam?" he asked quietly. Florence met his gaze, finding unexpected kindness there. "No," she said firmly. "I owe no debt to Silas Blackburn. He's stolen me away on my wedding day with lies." The foreman's face flushed with anger. "Shut your mouth, woman! The deal's been made." The cowboy's hand moved casually to rest on his holstered revolver. "I don't much like the idea of people being treated as property," he said. "Especially not ladies in their condition. You better ride on," the foreman warned. "Blackburn won't take kindly to interference." The cowboy smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "I've never been one to worry about what others take kindly to." In one fluid motion, he drew his gun and fired, the bullet knocking the foreman's weapon from his hand. The driver panicked, dropping the reins and jumping from the wagon. Florence grabbed the edge of her seat as the horses, startled by the gunshot, began to bolt. The cowboy spurred his horse alongside the runaway wagon and reached out a hand to her. "Jump!" he shouted over the thundering hooves. Florence hesitated for only a moment before taking his hand. With surprising strength, he pulled her from the wagon onto his horse. One arm wrapped securely around her waist as they slowed to a stop, watching as the wagon disappeared over the next rise. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his breath warm against her ear. "No," Florence replied, her heart racing from the rescue and their sudden proximity. "But they'll come after us." Blackburn doesn't let go of what he considers his. The cowboy nodded, urging his horse into a steady trot away from the road. Then we'd best not be here when they return. Name's Thomas Fairfield, by the way. Florence Wilson, she answered, one hand protectively over her belly. And I thank you for your intervention, Mr. Fairfield, but you've put yourself in grave danger. Thomas guided his horse toward a stand of cottonwoods in the distance. Wouldn't be the first time, he said with a quiet chuckle. And I reckon it won't be the last. As they rode in the growing darkness, Florence told Thomas everything about her father's death, her engagement to Joseph, and Blackburn's sudden claim of debt on the morning of her wedding. Thomas listened silently, his jaw tightening as she described Blackburn's reputation for taking whatever he wanted, regardless of law or decency. The debt papers he showed, Thomas asked finally. Did you see them closely? Florence shook her head. Just briefly. They had my father's name, but... She hesitated. My father kept meticulous records. If he'd owed money, he would have told me. They reached the cottonwood grove as the last light faded from the sky. Thomas helped Florence dismount, and quickly set about making a small, sheltered camp. His movements were efficient, practiced, suggesting a man accustomed to life on the trail. We'll rest here tonight, he said, spreading his bedroll for her. Come dawn, we'll head for Silver Creek. I know some folks there who might help. Florence settled onto the bedroll, fatigue washing over her. Why are you helping me, Mr. Fairfield? You don't know me. Thomas stoked the small fire he built, careful to keep it low enough not to be spotted from a distance. Let's just say I've seen Blackburn's kind before, he answered, his eyes reflecting the flames. Men who think money and power give them the right to own people's lives. He didn't elaborate further, but Florence sensed there was more to his story than he was sharing. As she drifted into an uneasy sleep, she wondered about the quiet cowboy who'd risked his life for a stranger. The morning brought a chill that penetrated Florence's thin wedding dress. Thomas offered his coat, which she gratefully accepted, wrapping it around her shoulders as they prepared to continue their journey. Silver Creek is about a day's ride, he told her, helping her onto his horse before mounting behind her. We'll need to be careful. Blackburn's men will be searching. They rode cautiously, avoiding the main trails and keeping to the cover of trees and ravines when possible. By midday, hunger gnawed at Florence's empty stomach, and Thomas stopped to offer her jerky and water from his supplies. It's not much, he apologized, but it'll keep you going until we reach town. Florence accepted gratefully, watching as he scanned the horizon with vigilant eyes. You seem familiar with this area, she observed. Thomas nodded, taking a swig from his canteen. I was born not far from here. Left when I was 16, but these hills have a way of calling a man back. And what brought you back now? His expression darkened momentarily. Unfinished business. Before Florence could press further, the distant sound of hoofbeats reached them. Thomas tensed, his hand moving to his gun as he quickly doused their small cooking fire. Get behind those rocks, he whispered urgently. Don't come out no matter what you hear. Florence obeyed, crouching behind a boulder as Thomas positioned himself to intercept whoever was approaching. The riders came into view, 3 men wearing Blackburn's distinctive brand on their vests. Fairfield, one called out, recognizing Thomas. Should have known you'd be mixed up in this. Boss wants his property back. Thomas stood his ground, hand hovering near his holster. The lady isn't property, he replied evenly. And she doesn't owe Blackburn anything. The lead rider laughed. That ain't for you to decide. Hand her over, and maybe we won't kill you. You're welcome to try, Thomas said, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. Florence watched in horror as the men fanned out, surrounding Thomas. Though outnumbered, he showed no fear. When the first man drew, Thomas's reaction was lightning quick. 2 shots rang out, and one of Blackburn's men fell from his horse. The others opened fire, forcing Thomas to dive for cover. The gunfight was brief but intense. When it ended, Thomas stood over the bodies of 2 men, while the third fled back the way they had come. Thomas himself was bleeding from a graze along his arm, but he dismissed it as nothing when Florence rushed to his side. "We need to move," he said grimly, retrieving their horse. "That one will bring more men." They rode hard through the afternoon, pushing the horse to its limits. By sunset, the distant lights of Silver Creek appeared on the horizon, offering the promise of temporary sanctuary. The town was smaller than Florence had expected, just a single street lined with weathered buildings. Thomas guided them to a modest cabin on the outskirts, where an older woman greeted them with concern but no questions. "Martha's an old friend," Thomas explained as the woman hurried to prepare hot food and clean bandages. "We can trust her." Martha Fox proved to be a godsend. She provided Florence with clean clothes to replace her ruined wedding dress and tended to Thomas's wound with practiced hands. After a hot meal, the first proper one Florence had eaten in days, Martha showed her to a small bedroom. "Rest now," the older woman said kindly. "The little one needs it as much as you do." Left alone, Florence sat on the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by the events that had turned her life upside down. Through the thin walls, she could hear Thomas and Martha speaking in low tones. "You're playing a dangerous game, Thomas," Martha was saying. "Blackburn won't stop until he gets what he wants. He falsified debt papers, Martha. Used them to take an innocent woman on her wedding day." "I couldn't just ride past. Your father would be proud," Martha replied softly, but also worried. "You know what Blackburn's capable of." The mention of Thomas's father piqued Florence's curiosity, but fatigue soon claimed her, and she fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. The next morning, Florence woke to find Thomas and Martha in deep conversation with a man she didn't recognize. They fell silent when she entered the room. "Florence," Thomas said, rising to his feet. "This is Judge Hammond. He's an honest man, which makes him rare in these parts." The judge, a silver-haired man with kind eyes, nodded respectfully. "Mrs. Wilson, I understand you've been through an ordeal. Thomas has told me about Blackburn's claim against your father." Florence squared her shoulders. "It's a false claim, sir. My father never borrowed money from Silas Blackburn." "I believe you," the judge assured her. "But Blackburn has considerable influence. The debt papers he's produced look legitimate enough to fool most people." "Then what can we do?" Florence asked, despair creeping into her voice. Thomas stepped forward. "Judge Hammond knows where your father's real records might be. If we can find them, we can prove Blackburn forged the debt. My father kept a ledger," Florence said, hope kindling within her. "He stored it at the church in Copper Creek." The judge nodded thoughtfully. "Blackburn wouldn't have thought to look there. If we can retrieve it before he realizes its importance." "I'll go," Thomas volunteered immediately. "Tonight." "It's too dangerous," Florence protested. "Blackburn's men will be watching the town." Thomas's expression was resolute. "Which is why I need to go alone. I know ways into Copper Creek that Blackburn's men won't be watching." Despite her objections, Thomas prepared to leave as darkness fell. Before mounting his horse, he took Florence's hands in his. "I'll be back by dawn," he promised. "Judge Hammond will stay with you and Martha until then." Florence found herself reluctant to let go of his hands. "Why are you risking so much for me?" she asked again, searching his face for answers. Thomas hesitated, then spoke quietly. 15 years ago, Blackburn did the same thing to my mother after my father died. Claimed a debt that didn't exist, took our ranch, and... He swallowed hard. "She didn't survive what he did to her. I was too young to stop it then. I'm not now." Florence's heart ached for the boy he had been and the man standing before her now. Without thinking, she reached up and touched his cheek gently. "Be careful," she whispered. He nodded once, then mounted and disappeared into the night. The hours of waiting were agonizing. Florence paced Martha's small cabin until the older woman insisted she sit and rest for the baby's sake. Judge Hammond tried to distract her with stories of the early days of the territory, but Florence's thoughts remained with Thomas, riding into danger for her sake. Dawn came with no sign of his return. As the morning stretched on, Florence's anxiety grew. Martha prepared breakfast that no one ate, and Judge Hammond kept watch at the window, his expression increasingly troubled. It was nearly noon when they heard the approach of multiple horses. Judge Hammond peered cautiously through the curtains, then stepped back, his face grave. "It's Blackburn," he said quietly. "And at least a dozen men with him." Florence felt the blood drain from her face. "Thomas." "No sign of him," the judge confirmed. "But they wouldn't be here unless—" The pounding on the door interrupted his thought. Martha motioned for Florence to hide in the bedroom while she answered. Florence heard Blackburn's voice, smooth as oil and just as slick. "Martha, you're harboring fugitives. That makes you an accessory to theft." "I don't know what you're talking about, Silas," Martha replied calmly. "Judge Hammond is visiting, that's all. Don't play games with me," Blackburn snapped. "We caught Fairfield sneaking into Copper Creek last night. After some persuasion, he told us where to find the woman." Florence's heart sank. They had captured Thomas. What had they done to make him reveal her location? Judge Hammond spoke up. "Silas, this has gone far enough. The debt you claim exists is questionable at best." "Is it?" Blackburn's voice carried a note of triumph. "Then you'll be interested in this ledger we found on Fairfield. Seems Preacher Wilson did borrow money after all." Florence couldn't stay hidden any longer. She emerged from the bedroom, facing Blackburn directly. "That's a lie," she declared. "My father kept meticulous records. If that ledger shows a debt to you, it's because you forged it." Blackburn's cold eyes assessed her, lingering on her pregnant belly. "Mrs. Wilson, you're in no position to make accusations. You're coming with me, as payment for your father's debt. Unless," he smiled unpleasantly, "someone else wishes to settle it." "Where's Thomas?" Florence demanded. "What have you done to him?" As if in answer, two of Blackburn's men dragged a battered figure forward. Thomas's face was bloodied, one eye swollen shut, but he was alive. When he saw Florence, he struggled against his captors. "Don't listen to him, Florence," Thomas called out, earning himself a blow to the stomach that doubled him over in pain. Blackburn clicked his tongue disapprovingly. "Mr. Fairfield has been most uncooperative. But he did provide us with this." He held up a leather-bound book that Florence recognized as her father's ledger. "Let me see it," Judge Hammond demanded, reaching for the book. Blackburn handed it over with smug confidence. The judge flipped through the pages, his brow furrowed in concentration. Florence watched anxiously, knowing that her future and Thomas's life depended on what those pages contained. Finally, the judge looked up. "There is a record of a loan here," he admitted, and Florence felt her heart drop. "But it's fully paid, Silas. The last entry shows the debt settled 3 months before Preacher Wilson's death." Blackburn's smile faltered. "That's impossible." "See for yourself," the judge said, turning the book so others could view the entry. "Paid in full, witnessed by Sheriff Taylor." One of Blackburn's own men leaned forward. "That's the sheriff's signature, boss." "I recognize it." Blackburn's face darkened with rage. "This changes nothing. The woman is still mine. I've claimed her, and in this territory, my word is law." "Not anymore," came a new voice. Sheriff Taylor himself stood in the doorway, backed by several deputies. "Judge Hammond sent for me yesterday. I've been waiting to catch you overstepping, Silas." Blackburn reached for his gun, but the sheriff was faster. "Don't," he warned. "You're facing kidnapping charges already." "Don't add attempted murder to the list." The standoff lasted several tense seconds before Blackburn slowly raised his hands. "This isn't over," he growled. As his men were disarmed and the situation brought under control, Florence rushed to Thomas's side, helping him to a chair. His face was a mask of pain, but his eyes were clear as they met hers. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "They ambushed me outside the church." Florence shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "You have nothing to apologize for. You risked everything to help me. The ledger, he said urgently. Did they tamper with it? No, she reassured him. My father did pay his debts. The judge confirmed it. Relief washed over Thomas's features. As Florence gently cleaned the blood from his face, Sheriff Taylor approached them. Blackburn will face charges, he informed them. But his influence runs deep. It might not be safe for either of you to stay in the territory. Thomas nodded grimly. I figured as much. He looked at Florence, his expression softening. What will you do now? Florence considered her situation unwed, pregnant, with no home to return to. I don't know, she admitted. Come with me, Thomas said suddenly. I have land in Colorado. It's not much, but it's far from Blackburn's reach. Florence was startled by the offer. Thomas, I can't ask you to take responsibility for me and my child. You're not asking, he replied firmly. I'm offering. Judge Hammond cleared his throat. If I might interject, such an arrangement would be more appropriate if there were a marriage. For the lady's reputation, you understand. Thomas looked embarrassed. I didn't mean to suggest. That is, I wouldn't presume. Florence surprised herself by laughing. After days of fear and tension, the sight of the brave cowboy suddenly flustered was oddly endearing. Are you proposing, Mr. Fairfield? She asked, a smile playing at her lips despite the seriousness of their situation. Thomas met her eyes steadily. I reckon I am, though it's not how I would have chosen to do it. I know we barely know each other, but I've seen enough to know you're a woman worth fighting for. Florence considered his words carefully. This was not the romantic courtship she had once dreamed of, but in Thomas she had found something rare, a man of honor, courage, and kindness. In the short time they had known each other, he had shown her more respect and care than Joseph ever had. If we do this, she said slowly, I want to be clear that it's not just about protection or propriety. I won't enter another loveless arrangement. Thomas took her hand gently. Florence, I can't claim to love you yet, that wouldn't be honest. But I care for you more than I thought possible after so short a time. I believe love can grow, if given the chance. His sincerity touched her deeply. Then yes, she answered softly. I will marry you, Thomas Fairfield. Judge Hammond performed the ceremony that very evening in Martha's cabin. Florence wore a simple blue dress that Martha had altered for her, with wildflowers gathered by the sheriff's wife as her bouquet. Thomas, his injuries tended but still visible, stood tall beside her as they exchanged vows. It was nothing like the elaborate wedding that had been planned with Joseph, but as Florence looked into Thomas's eyes while speaking her promises, she felt something she hadn't expected: hope, and the beginnings of what might someday be love. 2 days later, with Blackburn securely in the sheriff's custody awaiting trial, Florence and Thomas prepared to depart for Colorado. Martha had packed provisions for their journey, and the judge had provided letters of introduction to associates in Denver. As they mounted their horses, Thomas had acquired a gentle mare for Florence to ride. Sheriff Taylor approached with news. Thought you should know, he said grimly. Blackburn was found dead in his cell this morning. Hanged himself with his own belt. Thomas's expression remained impassive, but Florence felt him tense beside her. Are you certain it was suicide? He asked carefully. The sheriff shrugged. That's what the report will say. Between us, Blackburn had enemies beyond counting. Could be someone didn't want to risk him talking at trial. Florence shivered despite the warm morning sun. Blackburn's death meant they were truly free of his threat, but the manner of it served as a reminder of the harsh justice of the frontier. As they rode away from Silver Creek, Florence found her thoughts turning from the past to the future. The road ahead was long, and the life waiting in Colorado uncertain, but for the first time in months, she felt a sense of possibility. What's your land like? She asked Thomas as they traveled side by side. His face lightened as he described the valley he'd purchased 2 years earlier. Good water, sheltered from the worst of the winter storms. The cabin needs work, but the bones are sound. By the time the baby comes, we'll have it comfortable enough. The way he included her child in his plans, without hesitation or resentment, warmed Florence's heart. And what will we raise there? Cattle? Some. He nodded. But I was thinking horses might be our main business. I've always had a way with them, and there's good demand for well-trained stock. They talked of practical matters as they traveled, what supplies they would need, how to prepare for the coming winter, the possibility of hiring help once they were established. But beneath these conversations ran a deeper current of getting to know one another as husband and wife. Florence learned that Thomas had spent years working as a trail guide after leaving Montana, saving his earnings until he could afford his own spread. He discovered her love of books and talent for figures, skills that would serve them well in building their ranch. At night, they camped beneath the stars, maintaining a respectful distance that acknowledged the unusual circumstances of their marriage. Yet Florence noticed how Thomas's protective instincts never wavered, how he always ensured her comfort before his own, how his eyes sought hers across the campfire with growing warmth. On the 5th day of their journey, they encountered a creek swollen by recent rains. As they searched for a safe crossing, Florence's mare was startled by a snake and reared suddenly. Florence, heavy with child and unprepared, lost her balance and tumbled into the rushing water. Thomas was off his horse in an instant, diving into the creek without hesitation. The current was strong, but his powerful strokes brought him quickly to Florence's side. She was struggling to stay afloat, her sodden clothes weighing her down, panic evident in her eyes. "I've got you," he assured her, wrapping one arm securely around her as he guided them toward the shore. "Just hold on to me." They emerged from the water gasping and shivering, but alive. Thomas immediately wrapped his dry coat around Florence, rubbing her arms to restore warmth. "Are you hurt?" he asked anxiously, his hands moving to her belly. "The baby?" Florence placed her hand over his. "We're both fine, thanks to you," she said, touched by his genuine concern. "Though I fear I've ruined another dress." Thomas's relieved laugh warmed her more than any fire could have. Without thinking, Florence leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. It was their first kiss since the hurried one that had sealed their vows, but there was nothing perfunctory about it now. When they finally parted, Thomas's eyes held a new light. "I promise to protect you," he said softly, tucking a wet strand of hair behind her ear. "I intend to keep that promise for as long as you'll have me." "I believe that might be a very long time, Mr. Fairfield," Florence replied, surprising herself with the certainty she felt. 2 weeks later, they arrived at Thomas's ranch in the Colorado Territory. The valley was everything he had described, verdant meadows nestled between protective mountains, with a clear stream running through the property. The cabin, though rustic, was sturdily built and situated to catch both the morning sun and cooling afternoon shade. As Thomas helped Florence down from her horse, she gazed at the scene before her, the place that would become their home, where her child would be born and raised. Despite the hardships they had endured to reach this moment, despite the unconventional beginning of their marriage, she felt a profound sense of rightness. "Welcome home," Thomas said, his arms steady around her waist. Florence looked up at him, seeing the man who had risked his life for a stranger, who had offered marriage not as a transaction but as a partnership, who had shown through actions rather than words what kind of husband he intended to be. "Thank you," she said simply, but the words encompassed far more than gratitude for his welcome. That night, as they prepared for sleep in their new home, Thomas fashioned a makeshift bed for himself on the floor, maintaining the respectful distance he had established from the beginning. Florence, watching him arrange his bedroll, made a decision. "Thomas," she said softly, "we are truly husband and wife now. You need not sleep on the floor." He looked up, surprise and something deeper flickering in his eyes. "Are you certain?" "I would never presume, I know," she interrupted gently. "That's why I'm asking. I married you for protection, it's true. But these past weeks have shown me the kind of man you are. I find myself—" She hesitated, then continued with newfound confidence. "I find myself wanting more than just safety from this marriage. Thomas crossed to her side, taking her hands in his. "Florence," he said, his voice husky with emotion, "I need you to know something. When I first saw you in that wagon, wearing a wedding dress meant for another man, something inside me knew I couldn't let you go. It wasn't just about Blackburn, or righting old wrongs. It was about you." Florence felt tears welling in her eyes. "I think perhaps we were meant to find each other," she whispered. "My father used to say God works in mysterious ways." "Your father sounds like a wise man," Thomas replied, drawing her gently into his arms. "I wish I could have known him." "He would have liked you," Florence assured him, resting her head against his chest. "He valued honesty and courage above all else." Thomas pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "I will try to be worthy of his daughter," he promised. "And of the child she carries." 6 weeks later, as the first snow dusted the mountains surrounding their valley, Florence gave birth to a daughter. Thomas paced anxiously outside the bedroom as Mrs. Parker, their nearest neighbor who had come to assist with the delivery, guided Florence through her labor. When the cry of a newborn finally pierced the air, Thomas nearly broke down the door in his haste to enter. The sight that greeted him, Florence, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a soft blanket, stopped him in his tracks. "Come meet your daughter," Florence invited, her voice tired but happy. Thomas approached cautiously, as if afraid his rough hands might somehow harm the delicate infant. When Florence placed the baby in his arms, his expression of wonder and immediate love brought fresh tears to her eyes. "She's perfect," he whispered, one finger gently stroking the infant's cheek. "Just like her mother." Florence watched as this strong man, who had faced down gunmen without flinching, held her daughter with such tender care. In that moment she knew with absolute certainty that her father's debt, whether real or fabricated, had led her not to bondage but to freedom, not to misery but to joy. "What shall we call her?" Thomas asked, reluctantly returning the baby to Florence's arms. Florence considered for a moment. "Hope," she decided. "Because that's what you gave me when I had none left." Thomas sat on the edge of the bed, one arm around Florence's shoulders as they both gazed down at their daughter. "Hope Fairfield." He tested the name. "It suits her." As Hope drifted to sleep in her mother's arms, Thomas turned to Florence, his expression serious. "I need to tell you something," he said. "Something I should have said before now." Florence met his gaze, sensing the importance of the moment. "I love you," Thomas said simply. "Not because circumstances threw us together, or because you're the mother of this beautiful child. I love you for your courage, your kindness, your strength. I've known it for weeks, but I wanted to be sure you knew it wasn't just words." Florence's heart swelled with emotion. "I love you too," she replied, the words feeling as natural as breathing. "And I thank God every day for the debt that brought you into my life." Thomas kissed her then, a promise of all the years to come, years that would bring hardship and joy in equal measure, as life on the frontier always did, but years they would face together, bound not by false debts but by a love that had been forged in the crucible of adversity and emerged stronger for it. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing their valley in pristine white, a clean slate for the new family to write their story upon. Inside the cabin, Hope slept peacefully between her parents, unaware that her very existence was a testament to the truth that sometimes the most precious things in life come from the most unlikely beginnings.